Hi to everybody joining now. If you want to put where you're from in the chat, that would be great. And just wait a few minutes to let everybody join from the last session. Yeah, hi everybody. I'm just waiting for a couple of minutes to see who's joining after the last session finished, and then we'll get started. If you let me know where you're from in the chat, that'd be great. So we'll get started in just a minute once we let everybody who's coming from the last session arrive. If you just let me know where you're from in the chat, that would be lovely. Right, okay. I think we're going to get started now. So hi, I'm Sandra Young. Thanks for being here. It's great to be able to talk to you all today from wherever you're coming from. I see that there are people from lots of different parts of Europe at least. And today I'm going to talk to you about my work as an interpreter in the human rights field, and in particular in the context of speaker tours that I do with Peace Brigades International, one of my longest running clients. Hopefully you'll find the talk interesting and informative. Please don't hesitate to ask any questions. If you put them into the Q&A box that you should see at the bottom of your screen. And then I will either incorporate any questions that come in throughout the talk, or we can open up into a discussion at the end. So first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'll go into the rest of the talk. So I'm a trained translator and interpreter. I did a master's in translation and interpreting at the University of Westminster in 2010. And when I first started interpreting, I did a lot of public service interpreting, living in London, and specialized particularly in mental health during that time. And I now specialized in human rights translation and interpreting, particularly now going into aspects of the law, and also do a lot of investigative journalism translation. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the interpreting side of this particularly entails. So first, I'm going to give you a bit of background about how I got into human rights work. And so, I mean, I was always interested in this side of things. Throughout my life, I've always been involved in a lot of community projects and being involved in non-profit organizations on one level or another. Particularly in Brighton at the moment, I'm involved in various organizations related to food, so food redistribution, community allotments, these sorts of things. And I'm also involved in some migration work, helping to settle refugees that arrive in Brighton. When I finished my master's in interpreting, so this is the luck part. My interpreting lecturer at the time asked if me or another student, friend of mine, asked if we were interested in interpreting for a specific organization that he worked with at the time. In the end, they picked me. That happens to be PBI, Peace Brigades International, the work that I'm mainly talking about today. And also in the meantime, as I started interpreting alongside my public service interpreting work, then I worked with different NGOs in events, both paid and in volunteer social movements, such as the World Social Forum. And so through these experiences, I gained paid clients, and this is work that has grown through word of mouth organically over the course of my career. So firstly, I've been talking about Peace Brigades International. I'll tell you a little bit about who they are and what they do. So Peace Brigades International is an NGO working with human rights defenders. They started in the 1980s in Latin America, particularly going and supporting people in the context of the armed conflicts that were so prevalent during the 80s there. PBI now works in both Latin America and in other continents. So they work in Honduras, in Mexico, Colombia, in Costa Rica with Nicaraguan exiles, Kenya, Indonesia, and Nepal. And the basis of their work is particularly in Latin America, in Kenya, Indonesia, and Nepal, they have different models, but they're based on a volunteer NGO and work with protective accompaniment coupled with advocacy where PBI offices are based. So it's a peaceful movement, hence the name, which seeks to open spaces for human rights defenders, to enable human rights defenders to work in a broader, more open and safer space. So they do this by raising the profile of human rights defenders' work, raising the profile of any threats that they receive, and as a consequence, increase pressure on governments to better protect their citizens. PBI only operates in countries where they've received specific requests, petitions from the human rights defenders that they seek to support. So it is very much a supportive role for people to be able to develop their own work rather than any imposition or interference being taking place. And so I mentioned the term human rights defenders, but who are human rights defenders? So human rights defenders come in all shapes and sizes. The definition for human rights defender is one of people who either individually or with others act to promote or protect human rights in a peaceful manner. And yes, they come in all shapes and sizes. They could be a community leader, journalists, or lawyers. So just to give you a few examples, I could give an example of indigenous communities who oppose extraction projects on their land or their forced displacement from their land, so these extraction projects can take place. Or lawyers who take cases against the state, for example, for war crimes, for extrajudicial killings, these sorts of things. And then LGBTIQ activists would be another example. And so they all have one thing in common. They all fight for what they believe in, with the word, not the sword, obviously. And they dare to stand up for people's rights. And so what are speaker tours and why are they important? So part of PBI's work, as I said before, is the advocacy aspect to their work. And so advocacy is very important in opening spaces for human rights defenders to do their work because of the profile raising aspects of it. So human rights defenders will visit countries where PBI operates, such as the UK, and then they'll set up interviews and meetings with different people from UK society. So each one is very, very different. You always meet with some MPs or lords on the legislative side. Then if they're a lawyer, then you might meet with different lawyers associations, for example, the Alliance for Lawyers at Risk, or meet with specific QCs or barristers who work in the specific areas that these lawyers work in. If they're journalists, they might meet with newspapers, or you might meet with newspapers to do interviews to raise the profile, or also donors, for example. And so this is to share information about the work that any specific human rights defender is doing, raise their profile. And by being there in person, it helps to put faces to names, make bonds between these people, and really bring the reality of the situation home. So you can get more international solidarity. There's also the political aims, for example, if the UK, if it's a speaker tour in the UK, and from Colombia, for example, if there are specific links between the British government and the Colombian government. You can use that to exert political pressure. Or ask for parliamentary questions, debates to be taken up, or push for legal changes such as the due diligence law, which I know in the EU, then they're working on a various due diligence law, so you can push for certain things to get included. And then also with the public, the general public, you might have events to do and then talk about the violations that are being enacted by, say, British companies, and that could help people change their behavior. And all of this, the idea is to increase the level of protection that the human rights defender has. But yeah, so what does this mean for me as an interpreter? So speaker tours are one amazing to work on as an interpreter. They're so varied. You get to meet the human rights defenders themselves, which is a very humbling experience. But they're also very challenging. So as I've said, human rights defenders come in all shapes and sizes. They're very, very different. So, and you'll also be working in lots of different contexts. So if you're accompanying a lawyer at that point in time, then you need to be able to speak their language. Same with journalists. And also if you're working with indigenous people, then I work between Spanish and English, but Spanish is often not their first language. And so there might be idiosyncrasies in the way that they speak that you have to communicate. It also means that you've got to work with lots of different accents and interpreting and communicating different worldviews to people, to various actors. So that's another thing that you have to be aware of. It is nice with the speaker tour because you'll have the opportunity to have a meeting beforehand and discuss the specific goals that they have. And so that gives you an opportunity to ask and clarify any queries that you might have in this regard. Also, you have to work with a lot of different registers because you might be going for one meeting with, say, a diplomat at the Foreign Office, or having an event there, for example, and then going to work like doing a sort of more informal event with a group of activists that work in the same area, or as I've mentioned before, meetings between lawyers, groups of lawyers, and so the register there will be very different to one where you're meeting with other NGOs, for example. And yes, again, lots of different sorts of meetings. You'll be using a mix of whispered interpreting, and then you might be standing up in front of a couple of hundred people at the Foreign Office for International Human Rights Day. So you need to be quite flexible in the way that you're working, dress appropriately, and be prepared. And so what do I need to know? So you'll be working with various different countries. I meant the interpreting that I do, because working between Spanish and English, generally working with Latin American countries, I need to know a lot about the ins and outs of each country, the geography, their political affairs, history, social struggles, traditions, and customs. And then also working with human rights, and you need to know the structures of international human rights law, soft and hard law, binding, non-binding law, the different frameworks that exist, and how these are translated into the national laws, both in, say, the UK and the frameworks that exist in the Latin American countries that I work with. Also, on a personal level, it's not for the faint-hearted. As I'm saying, these people are human rights defenders at risk. So they face serious threats, often against their life, their physical integrity, for the work that they do. So you will be communicating the story of people who have faced many struggles. But it is a very, very challenging and very fulfilling role. You get to learn so much about different histories, geographies, and really, and we get to meet these people and live together with them the time that you're interpreting for them. Honestly, it's one of the most humbling experiences that I ever have. Whether you're meeting with lawyers, the community leaders, or journalists, they're people who continuously put their lives on the line to work for a better world. And yeah, in the moments between the events and the meetings, then you get to chat with them, talk to them about their lives, share aspects about our culture, their culture, and that's it's an experience that I find truly joyful. And you also get to go to many different places. I mentioned interpreting at the Foreign Office. I remember interpreting for Dina Metsa on International Human Rights Day a number of years ago there. In a panel, which was a really incredible experience. You go into the House of Lords, you go to Parliament, You get to interpret at lunches in the Law Society. And so these are really interesting spaces to be able to get access to that otherwise I'd never be able to see. But what other work do I do? So that's all of the speaker tour sort of work. But there's also working in internal meetings at Peace Brigades International and other organizations. But so yeah, with they can be a mix of virtual meetings and also in person. So like with different working groups, then they have working groups that do advocacy strategies, other sorts of just strategic work, the organizational planning. It's also where I've learned a lot about consensus decision making. I'm very glad that I'm the one interpreting it and not the one having to come to the decisions. And remote work has become a lot more prevalent since the pandemic started. And whilst it's a challenging challenging environment as an interpreter, because you have to have like your WhatsApp call open with your interpreting partner, you've got all of the technology, and there's all the issues that you have with sound. It's also opened up a whole new world of possibilities for work in human rights. So for example, starting to do lots of virtual side events when the Human Rights Council or the Security Council meet for the UN. And they bring together human rights defenders from all over the world working on similar topics, which is something that otherwise they wouldn't be able to share. And I think this is something that's a really important aspect of the work, because it helps human rights defenders in different parts of the world realize that there are other people in different parts of the world whose contexts vary greatly, but at the same time, there are so many commonalities. Also doing webinars and workshops. Then yeah, so the workshops, they can be both remote and in person. So things like doing self-care, digital security, these sorts of things. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about specialization in interpreting. So, I mean, one of the challenges, as I mentioned before, is always developing a sufficient knowledge base, because you need to be able to speak and be a source of knowledge on all of these topics that you're going to interpret for. And so specialization was something that people in interpreting didn't tend to do so much. You were expected to do many, but I've particularly specialized in human rights. And I think it's something that has taken place organically. Like, human rights is an enormous field. There are the more legal side. So for example, working in court cases relating to companies that have committed human rights violations in the course of their work through subsidiaries, these sorts of things. Or then there's you go down to the grassroots, so working with local NGOs or things in the sphere of international institutions. So there's so many different aspects to this work. And I've explored and continually expanded on my knowledge, like through reading, through different courses, and just through general experience. But I think also in the area of human rights, like, I mean, for example, I've worked with PBI now for the last 12 years, which one is not only just helps to have an enriching working relationship, because you get to know the people, you understand the organization inside out. And it's just a really fruitful experience for both parties, but also you get this level of trust that without this long-term working relationship, without this in-depth knowledge, just isn't there. And I believe that this is a really essential aspect, particularly in the area of human rights, and particularly in the way that PBI works with human rights defenders, because this level of trust is so essential. The people that they work with are exposed to extreme amounts of risk. They have their phones tapped, their offices raided, often have to go into temporary exile because of their work. And so having this level of trust there really, really helps them to feel that I will understand that their work, they feel that they can trust me to be their conduit. And that's something that I feel is really, really necessary. So if you want any information about PBI, then this is their UK address, and you can find out anything you want about their work there and get in contact with them if you want. And here's my contact number and my contact email and my website. And so now I'll open up to questions. If anybody's got any questions, then please write it in the Q&A, and I'm happy to answer anything that you want me to answer. I don't know if any of you who are listening are interpreters, if you're interested in going to interpreting, or if you work in any areas of human rights. I don't know if. Okay, so yeah, so Beatriz, are there any courses online that we could do to start building our career as interpreters? So it depends what languages you might work with. I know that, let me see if I can have a look. If in Spain, then there are some, oh, what's their names? Let's see if I can find it. But most courses with interpreting, then they tend to be in person. Have you got any experience as an interpreter? And is there a specific sort of interpreting that you're interested in going into? I'm not sure if I can get, here we go. Oops. I'll have a look, Beatriz, if you want to put your email, I can have a look and I'll send you some details about OK and Call. And there's a DPSI online, as DPSI online have said. So that's a public service interpreting. But yeah, so Beatriz, if you send me your details, then I'll do that. Yeah. If you just send me your email and I can send you that. So also got Jessica here saying, how did you transition from working in the field of mental health into human rights? You mentioned that you did a lot of reading on the subject, and is that how you'd recommend getting into that field? So yeah, I mean, like I was working in the field of mental health and working in human rights at the same time, really. I think when I started, the main bulk of my work was in public service interpreting. When I first started, I did a mix like of normal hospital visits, also doctor's visits. I also would go to probation meetings. I did social services. And then slowly I graduated to mainly working in the field of mental health because it was a particular interest of mine, and there was a lot of work there. Because of where I lived in London, I speak Portuguese, and like I'm a Portuguese and Spanish to English interpreter, and so I was in an area of London where there was a lot of Portuguese speakers. And yeah, reading, doing online courses, sort of like MOOCs about mental health, or whatever subject it is that you're interested in, attending webinars. Like I've talked about these webinars here. So sign up to NGOs, look for the side events that are going on in relation to the UN. Find whatever. This really applies to any specialization for translation and interpreting. It's about looking for, like, we've got the whole internet available to us. So you look for online courses, or if you want to go further in, then a lot of people end up doing separate masters. I'm actually considering doing that in the case of law. If I'm going to look more at going into the legal side of human rights, then that's something that I'll probably do. And also, okay, so I've done that one. And then Alice, so what was my degree like at Westminster? I've an undergrad in Hispanic studies. That's what I studied, Alice, too. I studied that at the University of Birmingham. Looking into studying interpreting and translation studies as a master's, considering Open University, but looking at universities in the UK. Yeah, no, I mean, I really enjoyed the Westminster course. If you want to do simultaneous interpreting, I'd advise that you do a purely interpreting masters. I did a mix, and I've ended up, we only had a taster for simultaneous, and I've learned simultaneous through practice throughout my career. But I started off in the masters, it was consecutive interpreting, a taster for simultaneous, and public service interpreting. It was a very practical course. I found it very useful. To the translation, what they called institutional translation, so things, the legal translation, financial translation, I found much more useful than the technical translation in the terms of Spanish. But for French, that was actually a lot more practical. So I think it depends on who they have teaching. I don't know who they have teaching now, but I'm also happy to send you more information about that. One of my colleagues was teaching at the University of Westminster. I think she can probably send you more information if that would be of interest. But yeah, so I found it a really practical and useful degree, basically. It was very different from my Hispanic studies degree, which was very interesting, but it was so literature based, and didn't have a clear profession lined out at the end of it. So I found it really helpful to have done the masters, basically. Let's see. So I've got here, it's from Sue, just about to start interpreting in addition to teaching privately. I'm offering Spanish initially, then Portuguese in the future, hopefully. I'm not trained as an interpreting, so I'm hoping I will be up to it. Any tips or advice? What sort of interpreting are you looking to do, Sue? Well, I mean, you need to practice, basically. So I'd start practicing with podcasts. There's also the speech pool that you can use. I'll type that here. If you're looking into doing public service interpreting, then I would get trained. The DPSI, if you've got the dpsionline.co.uk website, then look on there for the courses that they do, and that will, and you can also do preparation. It's got all of the information about the background you need. So you can either do it for law or health. I think they're the two streams. Well, no, not law, health, and then local government, I think, is the other streams. So it's really, really worth checking that out. So Speech Pool is somewhere that you can use to practice your talks. They have different ones that are best set up for simultaneous or best set up for consecutive practice. Find other people to practice with, record yourself, and then be very critical about the mistakes that you make and fixing that, reading extensively about whatever subject matter is, and keeping up to date on just general knowledge, because you never know what's going to come up in an interpreting job. With translation, then you've always got this chance. You've always got the chance you can look things up all of the time, but in the case of interpreting, then you've got to think on your feet. So yeah, so that's I hope that helps to answer your question. I don't know what else. So with Beatrice, you said that you can speak 4 languages and like to build a career in translation and interpreting. So yeah, Beatrice, I'll have a look for any online courses, because that would be interesting to have a look at, actually. I've got your email now. And then yeah, and the same goes for what I've been saying to the others about how to do it. It's like read extensively, practice with podcasts, practice with speech pool, train yourself, like for example, with if you're looking at public service interpreting with the DPSI, and that's that's basically it. I don't know if anybody else would like me to send, when I send Beatrice the information about online courses, if anybody else would like me to send it to them as well, then please just put your email in the chat, and I'll send that on. Has anybody got any other questions that they'd like to ask? Or yeah, anything else about my work as an interpreter, or getting into interpreting, or what I do with PBI, or other work that I do? Great. Yeah, let me see if I can actually open this. It gets very hard with screen sharing. Maybe I'll stop sharing the screen. You can see me a bit bigger now. I'll make a little list for people. Is there anybody in the room who's already an interpreter? For example, oh, where did that go? Now I've lost you all. Here we go. Yes. Whoops. Oh, that's great. Yes. So by Alice and Sue and Jordan, Santa Monte, I'll send you that. That's great. So yeah, I'll send you BB. So what sort of interpreting do you do? Yeah, whispered interpreting. It's funny to get that hug. It actually doing in-person interpreting, because obviously with the 2 years of my brain's gone blank. With the 2 years of the pandemic, then hadn't done any in-person interpreting for so long, and being able to go back and doing that again, and doing whispered interpreting, being so close to people's ears all of the time, It's a chance. Oh wow, so BB, you do lots of stuff with conflict resolution. That's got to be really, really interesting. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people who interpret don't have Jane, as you say, linguistic qualifications, but if you live abroad, then you often end up being pulled into doing translation. You end up working in translation, and sometimes you will get called up to do some ad hoc interpreting because people know that you speak that language, right? And Jane, where do you live? Oh, in Sicily, wonderful. Got to be beautiful. I was learning about what's the chocolate that they do in as a special well, I can't remember. I was watching a program about them making the special chocolate in Modica. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. In December, that's got to be, oh, it's delicious. It looks absolutely wonderful. So yeah, and have you all been enjoying the language show? Have you been to many other talks? So solo chatted. Oh, amazing. That sounds amazing, BB. Maybe I'll get to see you at a CIOL event at some point. What's BPG? Oh, Business Prevention and Government. Amazing. No. It'd be lovely to meet up in person and have a chat. And you can tell me about the work that you do. There's a link. So Jane, tell us about this link. I don't know if I can make it so people can talk. It would be nice to be able to just have a chat. Let's see. Let's see if there's any way of doing this. I don't know. Does anybody know if you can make people, you can turn people's mics on? I don't know. It doesn't look like it. That's a shame. Fascinating. I'll have to look at that. I didn't know that there was a link between the Aztecs, the Spanish, and the Sicilian. I was interested in the fact that they made chocolate in Sicily. So I mean, the cocoa, where does it come from? Does it grow there, or do you have to import it all? Yeah, no, exactly, imported. No, that's absolutely wonderful. One day I'll get there and I'll get to eat the chocolate. Yeah. So I don't know if anybody's got any more questions. Otherwise, yeah, no, wonderful. Little choc cookery. So do you like that chocolate, Jane? Is it a taste? Is it as tasty as it looks? Yeah. Okay. So if Sicily was under Spanish rule, then yeah, there we go. Yeah. So yeah, one of the multiple things that we wouldn't have had that we didn't have before the Americas were taken in that way. Oh, that sounds delicious. A 5-day chocolate business course. Absolutely fascinating. Yeah. I don't know if anybody's got any more questions. Well, oh, yeah, no, these have been done. Is anything more specific to help train memory for interpreting? One of the things that we did when we first started in the masters was doing memory exercises. So you start telling a story and you have to keep adding, but you have to keep remembering it. So those sorts of memory exercises. So if you read things and then you tell a story back, or you're listening to it and then you tell a story back. Also, you practice a lot of note taking. You need to be able to take notes. And I mean, this is also where specialization and knowing your subject comes in, because it's obviously a lot easier to remember something if you truly understand it, and you've got all of the context, because you've like it just works. Everybody knows that memory works like that, right? And like you remember things better when you've got the framework to hang it off. I was interpreting a few weeks ago for some Kenyans with a Spanish delegation, and they like to talk. So also when you know that you actually need them to stop for a minute, because they talk for about 10 minutes and I'm there taking my notes. So once it got to about 10-minute mark and I know that I've gone through so ever many pages of my notebook, then I know that that's the time that I have to tap them quietly on the shoulder, so I can relay that bit before they carry on, because it starts to get to a point where you worry about losing the thread of what it was that they were saying. But yeah, so, and as Jane says, a large component of short domain is association. So yeah, and yeah, so read about that. But yeah, just practice, and not getting stressed. I mean, the worst thing for your short-term memory is getting stressed and thinking you're going to forget it, because that means that your brain will automatically forget it. But it's something that yeah, you just train it. So the practices that we did were really quite good, because you've got a group and then somebody will start with giving one sentence and adding a sentence and adding a sentence, and then you've got to remember all of them, or doing it with things, so with lists of things and just keeping adding. So yeah, so that sort of thing. But yeah, no, thank you. This has been really, I hope you've enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed chatting with you afterwards. It's been very interesting. No, please do. Please email me. Let me share my screen again, and I'll so you can see. Oh, you'd have thought that I'd be able to use the technology by now, wouldn't you? Let's see. Portion of the screen. Share. Slowly. Oops. Let's see if we go through, get to the end, and then you can have my details. Oops. Oh. Technology is not my one today, is it? Not new share, the last share. Portion, close. There we go. So can you see it now? Hopefully you can see. Let me know if you can't see it, because I can't see if you're. Yes, thank you, Jane. Yeah, no, it's a terrible shame. Like anybody, if you want to chat to me at a different time, then just take my email and then we can get in contact. So what's Lorenzo said, if there have been any instances or episodes where they expected you to master or know well a specific variety of Portuguese and Spanish if you were to get the job? Well, yes. I mean, so with Portuguese, I speak European Portuguese, and a lot of the time people want Brazilian Portuguese. And with that, I will, and I don't do much interpreting with Portuguese anymore, because I did a doctorate starting in 2016. And over the 4 years of the doctorate, because Portuguese was always my second and weaker language, that was something that fell a little bit by the wayside. So I would do some consecutive interpreting in Portuguese, but I wouldn't do any simultaneous, and that's what I mainly work in now. But yes, so often ask for a specific variety of Portuguese. Spanish less so, although I mean I can definitely think of examples when it would be very, very necessary. For example, if you've got a sometimes if you've got people coming from a particularly rural part of Latin America and they have a very specific way of talking, then at least being able to talk to them before, if you can find somebody who at least has spent time in that region of the world, then it will help communication a lot. Whether I've not really been asked about that. I mean, but it's something that should be more on people's minds, I think, sometimes. I mean, obviously it's not always possible, and you have to get by in the way that you can, but languages change a lot depending on where you're from and the different words. So in more formal situations, then it's not such a problem. But if it's something that you're going to be speaking about, sort of very colloquial, it is going to be a very colloquial context, then that's something that can cause a lot of confusion, basically. So yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad that it is visible, because I'm very used to interpreting online. I'm not used to presenting online, and I never know what people can see and what they can't see. So that's good to know. I hope, Lorenzo, that helps to answer your question anyway. So yeah. Any more questions? Or if not, then I'll probably leave it there. It's been lovely. Thank you all for joining. I really enjoyed speaking to you all today. I hope you found it interesting too. And yeah, please do email me. Any of you that are based in the UK, then hopefully I'll get to see you at an event at some point. But yeah, it's been really, really lovely. Thank you. Oh, I'd love to come to Sicily. That's wonderful. Right. Well, I'll speak to you all soon. I'll have a look for the online courses, and I'll send those of you that have sent me an email, your emails, then I'll send you a link out later this weekend. Okay. Well, thank you all. You take care. And have a lovely afternoon. See how